Good morning and welcome back to Storytime Classics Live, produced by Southwest Shakespeare Company. I am your host, Bo Heckman. Today we'll be continuing in The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. On the first reading, which was chapters 1 through 3, we're about to pick up with chapter 4 today. It talks about Dante, a first mate of the Pharaon, his ship, and they've lost their captain at sea, died and buried at sea. And he is next in line to become captain. Well, they've just returned home, and he has sought out his father and his love, Mercedes. His father is overjoyed to see him, and Dante has come back with money, and he is off to see Mercedes, his love, after seeing his father, and finds out that there are other gentlemen trying to win her hand. None so, I guess, noble as Dante. But he's working this out currently. It is quite a tale. We've not really gotten into the gist of it yet. The darkness, the darkness. Okay, the real meat of the plot yet. I'll say the darkness. Goodness, I say some things sometimes. I may seem a little distracted today. My apologies for that. I'll share something personal and go a couple of years ago, 2017, I lost my father on this day. He lived to be a very old age. He was 96, but I still miss my best friend in the world. So if I seem a little bit off today, that could be a strong reason why. So now getting all that stuff out of the way, let's just jump in and have some fun and lose ourselves in a lovely and a great novel and a great story. Hope you're all doing well out there today. Hope it is a great Monday for all of you out there. And we will be just jumping on into The Count of Monte Cristo. Boy, I want a sandwich right now. Okay, anyway. Here we go with Chapter 4 of The Count of Monte Cristo. Chapter 4, Conspiracy. Danglars followed Edmond and Mercedes with his eyes until the two lovers disappeared behind one of the angles of Fort St. Nicholas. Then, turning around, he perceived Ferdinand, who had fallen, pale and trembling, into his chair, while Caderousse stammered out the words of a drinking song. "Well, my dear sir," said Danglars to Ferdinand, "here is a marriage which does not appear to make everybody happy." "It drives me to despair," said Ferdinand. "Do you, then, love Mercedes?" "I adore her." "For how long?" "As long as I have known her." "Always?" "Sit there, tearing your hair instead of seeking to remedy your condition. I did not think that was the way of your people." "What would you have me do?" said Ferdinand. "How do I know? Is it my affair? I am not in love with Mademoiselle Mercedes, but for you, in the words of the gospel, seek, and you shall find." "I have found already." "What?" "I would stab the man, but the woman told me that if any misfortune happened to her betrothed, she would kill herself." "Pooh! Women say those things, but never do them. You don't know Mercedes. What she threatens, she will do." "Idiot," muttered Danglars. "Whether she kill herself or not, what matter, provided Dantes is not captain?" "Before Mercedes should die," replied Ferdinand, with the accents of unshaken resolution, "I would die myself." "That's what I call love," said Caderousse, with a voice more tipsy than ever. "That's love, or I don't know what love is." "Come," said Danglars, "you appear to me a good sort of fellow, and hang me, I should like to help you, but—" "Yes," said Caderousse, "but how?" "My dear fellow," replied Danglars, "you are 3 parts drunk. Finish the bottle, and you will be completely so. Drink, then, and do not meddle with what we are discussing, for that requires all one's wit and cool judgment. I? Drunk? Said Caderousse. Well, that's a good one. I could drink for more such bottles. They are no bigger than cologne flasks. Pierre Pamphile, more wine. And Caderousse rattled his glass upon the table. You were saying, sir, said Ferdinand, awaiting with great anxiety the end of this interrupted remark. What was I saying? I forget. This drunken Caderousse has made me lose the thread of my sentence. Drunk, if you like. So much the worse for those who fear wine, for it is because they have bad thoughts which they are afraid the liquor will extract from their hearts. And Caderousse began to sing the two last lines of a song very popular at the time. Tous les marchands sont buveurs, Deo c'est bien prouvé par le déluge. You said, sir, you would like to help me, but... Yes, but I added, to help you, it would be sufficient that Dantes did not marry her you love, and the marriage may easily be thwarted, methinks, and yet Dantes need not die. Death alone can separate them, remarked Ferdinand. You talk like a noodle, my friend, said Caderousse, and here is Danglars, who is wide awake, clever, deep fellow, who will prove to you that you are wrong. Prove it, Danglars. I have answered for you. Say there is no need why Dantes should die. It would, indeed, be a pity. He should. Dantes is a good fellow. I like Dantes. Dantes, your health. Ferdinand rose impatiently. Let him run on, said Danglars, restraining the young man. Drunk as he is not much out in what he says. Absence servers as well as death, and if the walls of a prison were between Edmond and Mercedes, they would be as effectually separated as if he lay under a tombstone. Yes, but one gets out of prison, said Caderousse, who, with what sense was left him, listened eagerly to the conversation. And when one gets out, and one's name is Edmond Dantes, one seeks revenge. What matters that? Muttered Ferdinand. And why? I should like to know, persisted Caderousse. Should they put Dantes in prison? He has neither robbed, nor killed, nor murdered. Hold your tongue, said Danglars. I won't hold my tongue, replied Caderousse. I say I want to know why they should put Dantes in prison. I like Dantes. Dantes, your health. And he swallowed another glass of wine. Danglars saw in the muddled look of the tailor the progress of his intoxication, and turning towards Ferdinand, said, Well, you understand there is no need to kill him. Certainly not. If, as you said just now, you have the means of having Dantes arrested. Have you that means? It is to be found for the searching. But why should I meddle in the matter? It is no affair of mine. I know not why you meddled, said Ferdinand, seizing his arm, but this I know. You have some motive of personal hatred against Dante, for he is who himself hates is never mistaken in the sentiments of others. I, motives of hatred against Dantes? None, on my word. I saw you were unhappy, and your unhappiness interested me. That's all. But since you believe I act for my own account, adieu, my dear friend. Get out of the affair as best you may. And Danglars rose as if he meant to depart. No, said Ferdinand, restraining him. Stay! It is of very little consequence to me at the end of the matter whether you have any angry feeling or not against Dantes. I hate him. I confess it openly. Do you find the means? I will excuse it, provided it is not to kill the man, for Mercedes has declared she will kill herself if Dantes is killed. Caderousse, who had let his head drop on the table, now raised it, and looking at Ferdinand with his dull and fishy eyes, he said, Kill Dantes! Who talks of killing Dantes? I won't have him killed. I won't! He's my friend, and this morning offered to share his money with me, as I shared mine with him. I won't have Dantes killed. I won't! And who has said a word about killing him, Muddlehead? Replied Danglars. We were merely joking. Drink to his health, he added, filling Caedoros's glass, and do not interfere with us. Yes, yes, Dantes, good health, said Caedorus, emptying his glass. Here's to his health, hurrah! But the means, said Ferdinand. Have you not hit upon any? Asked Danglars. No, you undertook to do so. True, replied Danglars. The French have the superiority over the Spaniards that the Spaniards ruminate while the French invent. Do you invent, then? Said Ferdinand impatiently. Waiter, said Danglars, pen, ink, paper. Pen, ink, and paper, muttered Ferdinand. Yes, I am a supercargo. Pen, ink, and paper are my tools, and without my tools I am fit for nothing. Pen, ink, and paper, then, called Ferdinand loudly. There's what you want on that table, said the waiter. Bring them here. The waiter did as he was desired. When one thinks, said Caedorus, letting his hand drop on the paper, there is here withal to kill a man more sure than if we waited at the corner of a wood to assassinate him. I have always had more dread of a pen, a bottle of ink, and a sheet of paper than of a sword or pistol. The fellow is not so drunk as he appears to be, said Danglars. Give him some more wine, Ferdinand. Ferdinand filled Caedorus's glass, who, like the confirmed topper he was, lifted his hand from the paper and seized the glass. The Catalan watched him until Caedorus, almost overcome by his fresh assault on his senses, rested, or rather dropped his glass on the table. Well, resumed the Catalan, as he saw the final glimmer of Caedorus's reason vanishing before the last glass of wine. Well, then, I should say, for instance, resumed Danglars, that if after a voyage such as Dantes has just made, in which he touched at the island of Elba, someone were to denounce him to the king's procurer as a Bonapartist agent. I will denounce him, exclaimed the young man hastily. Yes, but they will make you then sign your declaration and confront you with him you have denounced. I will supply you with the means of supporting your accusation, for I know the fact well. But Dantes cannot remain forever in prison, and one day or another he will leave it, and the day when he comes out, woe betide him who has the cause of this incarceration. Oh, I should wish nothing better than that he would come and seek a quarrel with me. Yes, and Mercedes, who will detest you if you have only the misfortune to scratch the skin of her dearly beloved Edmond. True, said Ferdinand. No, continued Danglars. If we resolve on such a step, it would be much better to take, as I now do, this pen, dip it in this ink, and write with the left hand, that the writing may not be recognized, the denunciation we propose. And Danglars, uniting practice with theory, wrote with his left hand, and in a writing reversed from his usual style, and totally unlike it, the following lines, which he handed to Ferdinand, and which Ferdinand read in an undertone. The Honourable, the King's Attorney, is informed by a friend of the throne and religion that one of Edmond Dantes, mate of the ship Pharaon, arrived this morning from Smyrna, after having touched at Naples and Porto Faiaro, has been entrusted by Murat with a letter for the usurper, and by the usurper with a letter for the Bonapartist committee in Paris. Proof of this crime will be found on arresting him, for the letter will be found upon him, or at his father's, or in his cabin on aboard the Pharaon. Very good, resumed Danglars. Now your revenge looks like common sense, for in no way can it revert to yourself, and the matter will thus work its own way. There is nothing to do now but fold the letter as I am doing, and write upon it. To the King's Attorney, and that's all settled, and Danglars wrote the address as he spoke. Yes, and that's all settled, exclaimed Caderousse, who, by a last effort of intellect, had followed the reading of the letter and instinctively comprehended all the misery which such a denunciation must entail. Yes, and that's all settled, only it will be an infamous shame. And he stretched out his hand to reach the letter. Yes, said Danglars, taking it from beyond his reach, and as what I say and do is merely in jest, and I, among the first and foremost, should be sorry if anything happened to Dantes, the worthy Dantes. Look here. And taking the letter, he squeezed it up in his hands and threw it into the corner of the arbor. All right, said Caderousse. Dante is my friend, and I won't have him ill-used. And who thinks of ill-using him? Certainly neither I nor Ferdinand, said Danglars, rising and looking at the young man, who still remained seated, but whose eye was fixed on the denunciatory sheet of paper flung into the corner. In this case, replied Caderousse, let's have some more wine. I wish to drink to the health of Edmond and the lovely Mercedes. You have had too much already, drunkard, said Danglars, and if you continue, you will be compelled to sleep here, because unable to stand on your legs. I, said Caderousse, rising with all the offended dignity of a drunken man, I can't keep on my legs. Why, I'll wager I can go up into the belfry of the Accoules, and without staggering too. Done, said Danglars. I'll take your bet, but tomorrow. Today, it is time to return. Give me your arm and let's go. Very well, let us go, said Caderousse, but I don't want your arm at all. Come, Ferdinand, won't you return to Marseille with us? No, said Ferdinand, I shall return to the Catalans. You're wrong. Come with us to Marseille. Come along. I will not. What do you mean you will not? Well, just as you like, my prince. There's liberty for all the world. Come along, Danglars, and let the young gentleman return to the Catalans if he chooses. Danglars took advantage of Caderousse's temper at the moment to take him off towards Marseille by the Porte de Saint-Victor, staggering as he went. When they had advanced about 20 yards, Danglars looked back and saw Ferdinand stoop, picking up the crumpled paper and putting it into his pocket, then rush out of the arbor towards Pilon. Well, said Caderousse, why, what a lie he told. He said he was going to the Catalans, and he is going to the city. Hello, Ferdinand. You are coming, my boy. Well, said Caderousse, why, what a lie he told. He said he was going to the Catalans, and he is going to the city. Hello, Ferdinand. You are coming, my boy. Oh, you don't see straight, said Danglars. He's gone right by the road to the... Villers infirmaries. Well, said Caderousse, I should have sworn that he turned to the right. How treacherous wine is. Come, come, said Danglars to himself. How the thing is at work, and it will effect its purpose unassisted. Chapter 5. The Marriage Feast. The morning's sun rose clear and resplendent, touching the foamy waves into the network of ruby-tinted light. The feast had been made ready on the second floor at La Réserve, with whose arbor the reader is already familiar. The apartment destined for the purpose was spacious and lighted by a number of windows, over each of which was written in gold letters, for some inexplicable reason, the name of one of the principal cities of France. Beneath these windows, a wooden balcony extended the entire length of the house, and although the entertainment was fixed for 12 o'clock, an hour previous to that time, the balcony was filled with impatient and expectant guests, consisting of the favored part of the crew of the Pharaon and other personal friends of the bridegroom, the whole of whom had arrayed themselves in their choicest costumes in order to do great honor to the occasion. Various rumors were afloat to the effect that the owners of the Pharaon had promised to attend the nuptial feast, but all seemed unanimous in doubting that an act of such rare and existing condensation could possibly be intended. Danglars, however, who now made his appearance, accompanied by Caderousse, effectually confirmed the report, stating that he had recently conversed with M. Morel, who had himself assured him of his intention to dine at La Réserve. In fact, a moment later M. Morel appeared and was saluted with an enthusiastic burst of applause from the crew of the Pharaon, who hailed the visit of the ship owner as a sure indication that the man whose wedding feast he thus delighted to honor would ere long be first in command of the ship. And as Dantes was universally beloved on board his vessel, the sailors put no restraint in their tumultuous joy at finding that the opinion and choice of their superiors so exactly coincided with their own. With the entrance of M. Dorel, Danglars and Caderousse were dispatched in search of the bridegroom to convey to him the intelligence of the arrival of the important personage whose coming had created such a lively sensation, and to beseech him to make haste. Danglars and Caderousse set off upon their errand at full speed, but ere they had gone many steps, they perceived a group of advancing towards them, composed of the betrothed pair, a party of young girls in attendance on the bride, by whose side walked Dante's father, the whole brought up by Ferdinand, whose lips were their usual sinister smile. Neither Mercédès nor Edmond observed the strange expression of his countenance. They were so happy that they were conscious only of the sunshine and the presence of each other. Having acquitted themselves of their errand and exchanged a hearty shake of the hand with Edmond, Danglars and Caderousse took their places beside Ferdinand and old Dantes, the latter of whom attracted universal notice. The old man was attired in a suit of glistening watered silk, trimmed with steel buttons, beautifully cut and polished. His thin but wiry legs were arrayed in a pair of richly embroidered clocked stockings, evidently of English manufacture, while from these his three-cornered hat depended a long streaming knot of white and blue ribbons. Thus he came along, supporting himself on a curiously carved stick, his aged countenance lit up with happiness, looking for all the world like one of the aged dandies of 1796, parading the newly opened gardens of the Luxembourg and Tuileries. Beside him glided Caderousse, whose desire to partake of the good things provided for the wedding party had induced him to become reconciled to Dantes, father and son. Although there still lingered in his mind a faint and unperfect recollection of the events of the preceding night, just as the brain retains on walking in the morning the dim and misty outline of a dream. As Danglars approached the disappointed lover, he cast on him a look of deep meaning, while Ferdinand, as he slowly paced behind the happy pair, who seemed in their own unmixed content to have entirely forgotten that such a being as himself existed, was pale and abstracted. Occasionally, however, a deep flush would overspread his countenance, and a nervous contraction distort his features, while, with an agitated and restless gaze, he would glance in the direction of Marseille, like one who either anticipated or foresaw some great and important event. Dantes himself was simply but becomingly clad in the dress peculiar to the merchant service, a costume somewhat between a military and civil garb, and with his fine countenance radiant with joy and happiness, a more perfect specimen of manly beauty could scarcely be imagined. Lovely as the Greek girls of Cyprus or Chios, Mercédès boasted the same bright flashing eyes of jet and ripe, round coral lips. She moved with the light, free step of an Alsatian or an Andalusian. One more practiced in arts of great cities would have hid her blushes beneath a veil, or at least have cast down her thickly fringed lashes, so as to have concealed the liquid luster of her animated eyes. But on the contrary, the delighted girl looked around her with a smile that seemed to say, "If you are my friends, rejoice with me, for I am very happy." As soon as the birthday party came in sight of La Reserve, M. Morel descended and came forth to meet it, followed by the soldiers and sailors there assembled, to whom he had repeated the promise already given, that Dantes should be the successor to the late Captain Leclerc. Edmond, at the approach of his patron, respectfully placed the arm of his official affianced bride within that of M. Morel, who, forthwith, conducting her up the flight of wooden steps leading to the chamber in which the feast was prepared, the gaily followed by their guests, beneath whose heavy tread the slight structure creaked and groaned for the space of several minutes. "Father," said Mercédès, stopping when she had reached the center of the table, "sit, pray you, on my right hand. On my left I will place him who has ever been as a brother to me," pointing with a soft and gentle smile to Ferdinand. But her words and looks seemed to inflict the direst torture on him, for his lips became ghastly pale, and even beneath the dark hue of his complexion, the blood might be seen retreating as though some sudden pang drove it back into the heart. During this time, Dantes, at the opposite side of the table, had been occupied in similarly placing his most honored guests. M. Morel was seated at his right hand, Danglars at his left, while, at a sign from Edmond, the rest of the company ranged themselves as they found it most agreeable. Then they began to pass around the dusky piquant, Arlesian sausages, and lobsters in their dazzling red cuirasses, prawns of large size and brilliant color, the echinus with its prickly outside and dainty morsel within, the Clovis, esteemed by the epicures of the South as more than rivaling the exquisite flavor of the oyster, North. All the delicacies, in fact, that are cast up by the wash of waters on the sandy beach and styled by the grateful fishermen fruits of the sea. "A pretty silence, truly," said the old father of the bridegroom, as he carried to his lips a glass of wine of the hue and brightness of the topaz, and which had just been placed before Mercédès herself. "Now, would anybody think that this room contained a happy, merry party who desire nothing better than to laugh and dance the hours away?" "Ah," sighed Caderousse, "a man cannot always feel happy because he is about to be married." "The truth is," replied Dantes, "that I am too happy for noisy mirth. If that is what you meant by your observation, my worthy friend, you are right. A joy takes a strange effect at times. It seems to oppress us almost the same as sorrow." Danglars looked towards Ferdinand, whose excitable nature received and betrayed each fresh impression. "Why, what ails you?" asked he of Edmond. "Do you fear any approaching evil? I should say that you are the happiest man alive at this instant." "And that is the very thing that alarms me," returned Dantes. "Man does not appear to me to be intended to enjoy felicity so unmixed. Perhaps happiness is like the enchanted places we read of in our childhood, where fierce, fiery dragons defend the entrance and approach, and monsters of all shapes and kinds requiring to be overcome ere victory is ours. I own that I am lost in wonder to find myself promoted to an honor of which I feel myself worthy, that of being the husband of Mercédès." "Nay, nay," cried Caderousse, smiling, "you have not attained that honor yet. Mercédès is not yet your wife. Just assume the tone and manner of a husband, and see how she will remind you that your honor is not yet come." The bride blushed, while Ferdinand, restless and uneasy, seemed to start at every fresh sound. and from time to time wiped away the large drops of perspiration that gathered on his brow. Well, never mind that, neighbor Caderousse. It is not worth while to contradict me for such a trifle as that. 'Tis true that Mercédès is not actually my wife, but, added he, drawing out his watch, in an hour and a half she will be. A general exclamation of surprise ran around the table, with the exception of the elder Dantes, whose laugh displayed the still perfect beauty of his large white teeth. Mercédès looked pleased and gratified, while Ferdinand grasped the handle of his knife with a convulsive clutch. "In an hour?" inquired Danglars, turning pale. "How is that, my friend?" "Why, thus it is," replied Dantes. "Thanks to the influence of M. Morrel, whom, next to my father, I owe every blessing I enjoy, every difficulty has been removed. We have purchased permission to waive the usual delay, and at 2:30 the mayor of Marseille will be waiting for us at the city hall. Now, as a quarter past one has already struck, I do not consider I have asserted too much in saying that in another hour and 30 minutes Mercédès will have become Madame Dantes." Ferdinand closed his eyes. A burning sensation passed across his brow, and he was compelled to support himself by the table to prevent his falling from his chair. But in spite of all his efforts, he could not refrain from the uttering of a deep groan, which, however, was lost amid the noisy felicitations of the company. "Upon my word," cried the old man, "you make short work of this kind of affair. Arrived here only yesterday morning, and married today at 3:00. Commend me to a sailor for going the quick way to work." "But," asked Danglars in a timid tone, "why did you manage about the other formalities, the contract, the settlement?" "The contract," answered Dantes, laughingly. "It didn't take long to fix that. Mercédès has no fortune. I have none to settle on her. So, you see, our papers were quickly written out, and certainly do not come very expensive." This joke elicited a fresh burst of applause. "So that we presumed to be merely the betrothal feast, what we presumed to be merely the betrothal feast turns out to be the actual wedding dinner," said Danglars. No, answered Dantes. "Don't imagine I am going to put you off in that shabby manner. Tomorrow morning I start for Paris, 4 days to go and the same to return, with 1 day to discharge the commission entrusted to me. Is all the time I shall be present. I shall be back here by the 1st of March. And on the 2nd I give my real marriage feast." This prospect of fresh festivity redoubled the hilarity of the guests to such a degree that the elder Dantes, who, at the commencement of the repast, had commented upon the silence that prevailed, now found it difficult, amid the general din of voices, to obtain a moment's tranquillity in which to drink to the health and prosperity of the bride and bridegroom. Dantes, perceiving the affectionate eagerness of his father, responded by a look of grateful pleasure, while Mercédès glanced at the clock and made an expressive gesture to Edmond. Around the table reigned that noisy hilarity which usually prevails at such a time among people sufficiently free from the demands of social position not to feel the trammels of etiquette. Such as at the commencement of the repast had not been able to seat themselves according to their inclination, rose unceremoniously and sought out more agreeable companions. Everybody talked at once, without waiting for a reply, and each one seemed to be contented with expressing his or her own thoughts. Ferdinand's plainness appeared to have communicated itself to Danglars. Paleness appeared to have communicated itself to Danglars. As for Ferdinand himself, he seemed to be enduring the tortures of the damned. Unable to rest, he was among the first to quit the table, and, as though seeking to avoid the hilarious mirth that rose in such deafening sounds, he continued in utter silence to pace the farther end of the salon. Caderousse approached him just as Danglars, whom Ferdinand seemed most anxious to avoid, had joined him in a corner of the room. "Upon my word," said Caderousse, from whose mind the friendly treatment of Dantes, united with the effect of the excellent wine he had partaken of, had effaced every feeling of envy or jealousy at Dantes' good fortune. "Upon my word, Dantes is a downright good fellow, and when I see him sitting there beside his pretty wife, that is soon to be, I cannot help thinking it would have been a great pity to have served him that trick you were planning yesterday." "Oh, there is no harm meant," answered Danglars. "At first I certainly did feel somewhat uneasy as to what Ferdinand might be tempted to do, but when I saw how completely he had mastered his feelings, even so far as to become one of his rival's attendants, I knew there was no further cause for apprehension." Caderousse looked full at Ferdinand. He was ghastly pale. "Certainly," continued Danglars, "the sacrifice was no trifling one, when the beauty of the bride is concerned. Upon my soul, that future captain of mine is a lucky dog. Gad, I only wish he would let me take his place." "Shall we not set forth?" asked the sweet silvery voice of Mercédès. "2 o'clock has just struck, and you know we are expected in a quarter of an hour." To be sure, cried Dantes, eagerly quitting the table. "Let us go directly." His words were re-echoed by the whole party with vociferous cheers. At this moment, Danglars, who had been increasingly observing every change in Ferdinand's look and manner, saw him stagger and fall back, with an almost convulsive spasm, against a seat placed near one of the open windows. At the same instant, his ear caught a sort of indistinct sound on the stairs, followed by the measured tread of soldiery, with the clanking of swords and military accoutrements. Then came a hum and buzz as of many voices, so as to deaden even the noisy little party, among whom a vague feeling of curiosity and apprehension quelled every disposition of talk, and almost instantaneously the most death-like stillness prevailed. The sounds drew nearer. 3 blows were struck upon the panel of the door. The company looked at each other in consternation. "I demand admittance," said a loud voice outside the room. "In the name of the law." As no attempt was made to prevent it, the door was opened, and a magistrate wearing his official scarf presented himself, followed by 4 soldiers and a corporal. Uneasiness now yielded to the most extreme dread on the part of those present. "May I venture to inquire the reason of this unexpected visit?" said M. Morrel, addressing the magistrate, whom he evidently knew. "There is doubtless some mistake easily explained." "If it be so," replied the magistrate, rely upon every reparation being made. Meanwhile, I am the bearer of an order of arrest, and although I most reluctantly perform the task assigned me, it must nevertheless be fulfilled. Who among the persons here assembled answers to the name of Edmond Dantes?" Every eye was turned towards the young man, who, spite of the agitation he could not but feel, advanced with dignity, and said in a firm voice, "I am he. What is your pleasure with me?" "Edmond Dantes," replied the magistrate. "I arrest you in the name of the law." "Me?" replied Edmond, slightly changing color. "And wherefore, I pray?" "I cannot inform you, but you will be duly acquainted with the reasons, and have rendered such a step necessary as the preliminary examination." M. Morrel felt that further resistance or remonstrance was useless. He saw before him an officer delegated to enforce the law, and perfectly well knew it would be as unavailing to seek pity from a magistrate decked with his official scarf as to address a petition to some cold marble effigy. Old Dantes, however, sprang forward. There are situations which the heart of a father or a mother cannot be made to understand. He prayed and supplicated in terms so moving that even the officer was touched, and, although firm in his duty, he kindly said, "My worthy friend, let me beg of you to calm your apprehensions. Your son has probably neglected some prescribed form of attention in registering his cargo, and it is more than probable he will be set at liberty directly. Set at liberty directly he has given the information required, whether touching the health of his crew or the value of his freight. What is the meaning of all this? Inquired Caderousse, frowningly, of Danglars, who had assumed an air of utter surprise. How can I tell you? Replied he. I am, like yourself, utterly bewildered at all that is going on, and cannot in the least make out what it is about. Caderousse then looked around for Ferdinand, but he had disappeared. The scene of the previous night now came back to his mind with startling clearness. The painful catastrophe he had just witnessed appeared effectually to have rent away the evil which the intoxication of the evening before had raised between himself and his memory. So, said he, in a hoarse and choking voice to Danglars. This, then, I suppose, is a part of the trick you were concerting yesterday. All I can say is that if it be so, 'tis an ill turn, and well deserves to bring double evil on those who have projected it. Nonsense, returned Danglars. I tell you again, I have nothing whatever to do with it. Besides, you know very well that I tore the paper to pieces. No, you did not, answered Caderousse. You merely threw it by. I saw it lying in a corner. Hold your tongue, you fool. What should you know about it? Why, you were drunk. Where is Ferdinand? Inquired Caderousse. How do I know? Replied Danglars. Gone, as every prudent man ought to be, to look after his own affairs, most likely. Never mind where he is. Let you and I go and see what is to be done for our poor friends. During this conversation, Dantes, after having exchanged a cheerful shake of the hand with all his sympathizing friends, had surrendered himself to the officer sent to arrest him, merely saying, Make yourselves quite easy, my good fellows. There is some little mistake to clear up. That's all. Depend upon it, and very likely I may not have to go so far as the prison to effect that. Oh, to be sure, responded Danglars, who now approached the group. Nothing more than a mistake, I feel quite certain. Dantes descended the staircase, preceded by the magistrate and followed by the soldiers. A carriage awaited him at the door. He got in, followed by 2 soldiers and the magistrate, and the vehicle drove off towards Marseille. Adieu, adieu, dearest Edmond, cried Mercédès, stretching out her arms to him from the balcony. The prisoner heard the cry, which sounded like the sob of a broken heart, and leaning from the coach, he called out, Goodbye, Mercédès, we shall soon meet again, and the vehicle disappeared round one of the turnings of Fort St. Nicholas. Wait for me here, all of you, cried M. Morrel. I will take the first conveyance I find, and hurry to Marseille, whence I will bring you word how all is going on. That's right, exclaimed a multitude of voices. Go, and return as quickly as you can. This second departure was followed by a long and fearful state of terrified silence on the part of those who were left behind. The old father and Mercédès remained for some time apart, each absorbed in grief, but at length the 2 poor victims of the same blow raised their eyes, and with a simultaneous burst of feeling rushed into each other's arms. Meanwhile, Ferdinand made his appearance, poured out for himself a glass of water with a trembling hand, then hastily swallowing it, went to sit down at the vast vacant place. And this was, by mere chance, placed next to the seat on which poor Mercédès had fallen half fainting, when released from the warm and affectionate embrace of old Dantes. Instinctively, Ferdinand drew back his chair. He is the cause of all this misery. I am quite sure of it, whispered Caderousse, who had never taken his eyes off Ferdinand to Danglars. I don't think so, answered the other. He's too stupid to imagine such a scheme. I only hope the mischief will fall upon the head of whoever brought it. You don't mention those who aided and abetted the deed, said Caderousse. Surely, answered Danglars, one cannot be held responsible for every chance arrow shot in the air. You can indeed when the arrow lights point downward on somebody's head. Meantime, the subject of the arrest was being canvassed in every different form. "What think you, Danglars," said one of the party, turning towards him, "of this event?" "Why," replied he, I think it just possible Dantes may have been detected with some trifling article on board ship, considered here as contraband. But how could he have done so without your knowledge, Danglars, since you are the ship's supercargo?" "Well, as for that, I could only know what I was told respecting the merchandise with which the vessel was laden. I know she was loaded with cotton, and that she took in her freight at Alexandria from Pastret's warehouse, and at Smyrna from Pascal's. That is all I was obliged to know, and I beg I may not be asked for any further particulars." "Now I recollect," said the afflicted old father. "My poor boy told me yesterday he had got a small case of coffee and another of tobacco for me." "There, you see," exclaimed Danglars, "now the mischief is out. Depend upon it, the custom-house people went rummaging about the ship in our absence and discovered poor Dante's hidden treasures." Mercedes, however, paid no heed to this explanation of her lover's arrest. Her grief, which she had hitherto tried to restrain, now burst out in a violent fit of hysterical sobbing. "Come, come," she said the old man. "Be comforted, my poor child. There is still hope." "Hope," repeated Danglars. "Hope," faintly murmured Ferdinand. But the world seemed to die away on his pale, agitated lips, and a convulsive spasm passed over his countenance. "Good news! Good news!" shouted forth one of the party stationed in the balcony on the lookout. "Here comes M. Morrel back. No doubt now we shall hear that our friend is released." Mercedes and the old man rushed to meet the ship owner and greeted him at the door. He was very pale. "What news?" exclaimed a general burst of voices. "Alas, my friends," replied M. Morrel with a mournful shake of his head, "the thing has assumed a more serious aspect than I expected." "Oh, indeed, indeed, sir, he is innocent," sobbed forth Mercedes. "That I believe," answered M. Morrel, "but still he is charged—" "With what?" inquired elder Dantes. "With being an agent of the Bonapartist faction. Many of our readers may be able to recollect how formidable such an accusation became in the period at which our story is dated." A despairing cry escaped the pale lips of Mercedes. The old man sank into a chair. "Ah, Danglars," whispered Caderousse, "you have deceived me. The trick you spoke of last night has been played, but I cannot suffer a poor old man or an innocent girl to die of grief through your fault. I am determined to tell them all about it." "Be silent, you simpleton," cried Danglars, grasping him by the arm, "or I will not answer even for your own safety. Who can tell whether Dantes be innocent or guilty? The vessel did touch at Elba, where he quitted it, and passed a whole day in the island. Now, should any letters or other documents of a compromising character be found upon him, will it not be taken for granted that all who upheld him are his accomplices?" With the rapid instinct of selfishness, Caderousse readily perceived the sordidity of this mode of reasoning. He gazed doubtfully, wistfully, on Danglars, and then caution supplanted generosity. "Suppose we wait a while and see what comes of it," said he, casting a bewildered look on his companion. "To be sure," answered Danglars. "Let us wait, by all means. If he be innocent, of course he will be set at liberty. If guilty, why, it is no use involving ourselves in a conspiracy. Let us go, then. I cannot stay here any longer." "With all my heart," replied Danglars, pleased to find the other so tractable. "Let us take ourselves out of the way, and leave things for the present to take their course." After their departure, Ferdinand, who had now again become the friend and protector of Mercedes, led the girl to her home, while some friends of Dantes conducted his father, nearly lifeless, to the Allées des Melians. The rumor of Edmond's arrest as a Bonapartist agent was not slow in circulating through the city. Could you ever have credited such a thing, my dear Danglars? Asked M. Morrel, as, on his return to the port of the purpose of gleaning fresh tidings of Dantes from M. de Villefort, the assistant procurer, he overtook his supercargo and Caderousse. Could you have believed such a thing possible? Why, you know I told you, replied Danglars, that I considered the circumstance of his having anchored at the island of Elba as a very suspicious circumstance. And did you mention these suspicions to any person beside myself? Certainly not, returned Danglars, then added in a low whisper, you understand that on account of your uncle, M. Policar Morrel, who served under the other government, and who does not altogether conceal what he thinks on the subject, you are strongly suspected of regretting the abdication of Napoleon. I should have feared to injure both Edmond and yourself, had I divulged my own apprehensions to a soul. I am too well aware that although a subordinate, like myself, is bound to acquaint the ship owner with everything that occurs, there are many things he ought most carefully to conceal from all else. "'Tis well, Danglars, 'tis well," replied M. Morrel. "You are a worthy fellow, and I had already thought of your interests in the event of poor Edmond having become captain of the Pharaon. Is it possible you were so kind?" "Yes, indeed. I had previously inquired of Dantes what was his opinion of you, and if he should have any reluctance to continue you in your post, for somehow I have perceived a sort of coolness between you." "And what was his reply?" "That he certainly did think he had given you offence in an affair which he merely referred to without entering into particulars, but that whoever possessed the good opinion and confidence of the ship's owners would have his preference also." "The hypocrite!" murmured Danglars. "Poor Dantes," said Caderousse. "No one can deny his being a noble-hearted young fellow." "But meanwhile," continued M. Morrel, "here is the Pharaon without a captain." "Ah," replied Danglars, "since we cannot leave this port for the next 3 months, let us hope that ere the expiration of that period Dantes will be set at liberty." "No doubt, but in the meantime—" "I am entirely at your service, M. Morrel," answered Danglars. "You know that I am as capable of managing a ship as the most experienced captain in the service. It will be so far advantageous to you to accept my services that upon Edmond's release from prison, no further change will be requisite on board the Pharaon than for Dantes and myself each to resume our respective posts." "Thanks, Danglars. That will smooth over all difficulties. I fully authorize you at once to assume the command of the Pharaon, and look carefully to the unloading of her freight. Private misfortunes must never be allowed to interfere with business." "Be easy on that score, M. Morrel. But do you think we shall be permitted to see our poor Edmond?" "I will let you know that directly. I have seen M. de Villefort, whom I shall endeavor to interest in Edmond's favor. I am aware he is a furious royalist, but in spite of that, and of his being king's attorney, he is a man like ourselves, and I fancy not a bad sort of one." "Perhaps not," replied Danglars, "but I hear that he is ambitious, and that's rather against him." "Well, well," returned M. Morrel, "we shall see. But now hasten on board. I will join you there ere long." So saying, the worthy shipowner acquitted the two allies and proceeded in the direction of the Palais de Justice. "You see," said Danglars, addressing Caderousse, "the turn things have taken. Do you still feel any desire to stand up in his defence?" "Not the slightest. But yet it seems to me a shocking thing that a mere joke should lead to such consequences." But who perpetrated that joke? Let me ask. Neither you nor myself, but Ferdinand. You knew very well that I threw the paper into the corner of the room. Indeed, I fancied I had destroyed it." "Oh, no," replied Caderousse. "That I can answer for you. You did not. I only wish I could see it now as plainly as I saw it lying all crushed and crumpled in the corner of the arbor." "Well, then, if you did depend upon it, Ferdinand picked it up and either copied it or caused it to be copied. Perhaps even he did not take the trouble of recopying it. And now I think of it, by heavens, he may have sent the letter itself." Fortunately for me, the handwriting was disguised. Then you were aware of Dantes being engaged in a conspiracy? Not I. As I before said, I thought the whole thing was a joke, nothing more. It seems, however, that I have unconsciously stumbled upon the truth. Still, argued Caderousse, I would have a great deal if nothing of the kind. I would give a great deal if nothing of the kind had happened, or at least that I had no hand in it. You will see, Danglars, that it will turn out an unlucky job for both of us. Nonsense. If any harm come of it, it should fall on a guilty person, and that, you know, is Ferdinand. How can we be implicated in any way? All we have to do is to keep our own counsel and remain perfectly quiet, not breathing a word to any living soul, and you will see that the storm will pass away without in the least affecting us. Amen, responded Caderousse, waving his hand in token of adieu to Danglars and bending his steps towards the Allée des Melians, moving his head to and fro and muttering as he went, after the manner of one whose mind was overcharged with one absorbing idea. So far, then, said Danglars mentally, all has gone as I would have it. I am, temporarily, commander of the Pharaon, with the certainty of being permanently so, if that fool of a Caderousse can be persuaded to hold his tongue. My only fear is the chance of Dantes being released. But there he is in the hands of justice, and, added with a smile, she will take her own. So saying, he leaped into a boat, desiring to be rowed on board the Pharaon, where M. Morrel had agreed to meet him. And we will stop here today and pick up next time with Chapter 6, The Deputy Procureur du Roi. Wow, this is getting exciting. They've really inadvertently put him in a very, very difficult place. And we'll see how this pops out. There's a comment here today. Yay! And explaining why I had to turn my phone off. Thank you for that. An incoming thing from Mary Way, the producer of this show. Right. Thank you for tuning in today. Hope you're enjoying the story. We will catch you next time on Storytime Classics Live. Hope you have a great rest of your day today. Again, if you would like to comment or start a discussion about the story of which we're reading, please feel free to do so in any of the comment sections, either on Southwest Shakespeare's Facebook page or YouTube page. I will see you again next time on Storytime Classics Live. Have a great day, and if you're going out, please be safe, and please wear a mask. We'll see you next time.